Hey everyone, Spud the Potato here, and as always, I have another great video for y'all, because that's just how I roll. Now today, we're going to be talking about one of the most underrated music genres of all time, video game music. Now let me get this out the way. I'm a very avid gamer. I've been playing games since I was 4 years old on my mom's Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and I moved on to PS1 and N64. However, most of my growing up came from the 6th and 7th generation, so you know, PlayStation 2, GameCube, PS3, 360, and Wii. Never got into the OG Xbox. Fortunately, since I have grown up around video games, I've been able to experience old school and new school. You know, that young blood stuff. So yes, while we are exploring the evolution of video game music, we will have to talk about video games. I mean, that's only natural. Video games, video game music, they go hand in hand, right? So, without any further ado, let's
dive on in!
Before the epicness that was God of War or Final Fantasy, we had Pong. Yeah, just Pong. Released in 1972 on the Atari, it consisted of 3 different sounds. That's right, sounds, no music here. While there were other games before Pong, none of them even had sound. But thanks to Pong, this gave a boost to the video game industry, and the world started to take games a bit more seriously. I mean, we got video game arcades, right? And while arcades helped boost the popularity of gaming, we got another big hitter in 1978 with the success of Space Invaders. And it's claimed that one of the reasons for Space Invaders' success is due to its music. Space Invaders used sound in a functional way. The rhythmical bass soundtrack, which sped up with the rhythm of the game, was an integral part of the game experience. Before Space Invaders, sound in video games had generally been used as padding or a subordinate bonus. But afterwards, game developers could no longer afford to ignore this aspect. Outside of Space Invaders, Asteroids, which had a 2-note melody, encouraged the desire to have game music go beyond the typical beep noise that was so popular at the time. Luckily, we were introduced to a real gaming song with the release of Rally X in 1980. Rally X didn't exactly use a song, but it was the first video game to have continuous background music. Then, we got the iconic Pac-Man. I should note, we're talking about arcade games. At that time, this was a bit too complex to be implemented into home gaming consoles. And while some arcades did have more advanced chips installed, they weren't used for implementing music, but rather for richer sound effects. At first, this might sound strange, but there was a marketing strategy behind all of this. Music was only used for giving cues to potential players. If a game wasn't being played, there would be an intro song to entice gamers into playing the gaming cabinet. When the game would start, game music would be replaced with sound effects only. And while some gaming cabinets were capable of having gaming music and sound effects, most didn't have the available memory to implement the concept. It wasn't until 1981's Frogger that we were introduced to video game music without loops. It featured 11 different gameplay songs. However, the use of looping music had continued to remain popular because it was seen as a distinctive aesthetic in gaming. While there were companies creating original music, the use of pre-composed music was also a common strategy. During those times, to create video game music, sound would have to be transcribed into code. Video gaming was growing in popularity, and while there were a few crashes here and there, the industry managed to pick itself back up. Outside of the arcade scene, there was Apple, who had released the Apple II in 1977 and had ports that allowed joysticks to be connected. Apple was going in the right direction, and it became even more apparent with the release of the Commodore's C64 in 1982. And in 1983, we saw the release of MOS technology, or MOS. I won't go into all the technical aspects of the chip, since I'm not a sound engineer, but on a basic level, it allowed a large array of different types of musical capability. The only downside to the chip was its complexity for programming. Now, I was really curious to check out what games sounded like with the SID chip, so with some research, I found some really cool music coming from the C64. And while these songs were cool for its time, well, actually, I still think they're cool, many C64 games lack music due to the technical limitations. To counter this, programmers would create loops for their songs. Unfortunately, even with looping their songs, the majority of storage was reserved for graphics. As stated by composer Rob Hubbard, sound has always been the poor relation of graphics in the computer game world. Proof that humans are more interested in what they can see than what they can hear. Playing second fiddle to the graphics means you get allocated only a tiny share of the computer's memory, typically between 4K and 6K. Not only do you have to fit your tune into that space, you also have to find room to define all sounds, not just for the music, but also for the game-activated sound effects. Another issue that composers had to face was making sure their music would still sound correct with different sound chips. Not all sound chips were created equally and could result in some very wonky sounds. Composer Michael Pummel stated, "It's like writing for a string quartet. Imagine having only 4 instruments and you're supposed to keep it interesting. That's the challenge." For most, it wasn't until the NES release that people would consider video game music to be real video game music. From a technical perspective, the NES had a custom-made sound chip that provided 5 channels. Even with 5 channels, the NES still had to share it with sound effects. However, this is where the genius of Japanese creativity comes to play. Despite the limitations, they were still able to take advantage of it by creating a unique sound that is known to the NES. Koji Kondo was known for creating 2 of Nintendo's most famous themes of all time, The Legend of Zelda, The Legend of Zelda's overworld theme, and Super Mario Bros. Theme. With Super Mario Bros. Being the first game to feature constant background music written by a professional composer. In the beginning of this video, I said that video game music was highly underrated, or should I say is highly underrated. But this wasn't always the case. In America it was underrated, but during the time of the NES, video game soundtracks were very popular in Japan. For example, Koichi Sugiyama took part in creating music for Dragon Quest and was the first video game composer to record his music with a live orchestra. In 1987, the Dragon Quest in Concert Family Classics concert Wow, that's a mouthful. It was the first video game music concert in history. Despite video game music being unpopular in the West, there is one person who breaks that rule, Nobuo Uematsu. Granted, he isn't a household name, but he is far more well known than any other video game composer. Uematsu is known for his work with the Final Fantasy series. Some of his most popular songs are One Winged Angel, To Zanarkand, and Aerith's theme. According to Uematsu, he combines Eastern and Western styles of instrumental music. While Nintendo seemed to be on top of things, eventually some real competition came into light, and they did what Nintendo don't.
Can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis.
Duh.
Genesis.
Duh.
Genesis.
Duh.
Genesis.
Duh.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade hits.
Can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
What Nintendo?
Introducing Sega! The 90s is when Nintendo and Sega really duked it out during the bit wars. Nintendo's system was still stuck in the 8-bit era, while Sega was pushing for it with their 16-bit Mega Drive, or Genesis. The Mega Drive not only had better graphical fidelity, but had richer sound. Unfortunately, this didn't change how songs were structured, meaning games still relied on looping strategies. But thanks to the upgrade in the Mega Drive sound chip, games were able to have music that sounded closer to keyboards. But Sega's advantage was short-lived with the release of the Super NES. Released in 1990, the SNES added a larger selection of DSP effects, digitized sound, and full stereo sound to console games. With video game music becoming more sophisticated, we start to see cover songs and licensed music being used in games. And while sound quality was getting better, it was nothing compared to what was coming up in the future. A new media format, the CD-ROM. With CD-ROMs, games were able to use live instruments, vocals, and dialogue. In other words, streaming audio was the main concept for integrating music rather than programming it. And since the music was pre-recorded, the sound quality was drastically better. And while there were still some issues such as gaps in music after a track had finished its loop, the downsides were far and few between. The first 32-bit consoles were the 3DO and Atari Jaguar. And while a technical marvel, they were extremely expensive, which led to a limited third-party support and poor sales. But Sega did somewhat better with the Sega Saturn. Sort of. It's okay though, they followed up with the Sega Dreamcast, which... The only console during the 90s to be a success with its 32-bit CD-ROM tech was Sony, with the PlayStation. The funny thing is, Sony released the PS1 boasting about its 32-bit, while Nintendo went even further by releasing the N64, which was a 64-bit system. However, unlike Sony, Nintendo decided to stick with a cartridge-based system, which led to limitations in music and storage. The PlayStation's competitor, the Nintendo 64, is also capable of producing 24 voices, but they were not dynamic. This means that once a patch is allocated to a particular voice on the machine, it was very hard to change to a different patch. In addition, the Nintendo does not allow Redbook audio as it does not use CD-ROMs. Despite Nintendo's musical limitations, they still introduced some amazing video game music, such as The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The irony is, not only did Ocarina of Time have amazing music, you could technically create your own music by using the ocarina in the game. However, when it came to sound fidelity, PlayStation had Nintendo beat. The only downside, as I mentioned earlier, were the gaps in between songs when a song would end. Before using CD-ROMs, music would continuously loop without any pauses. There are some exceptions to this, such as Nobuo Uematsu's Final Fantasy VII, which used MIDI from the onboard synth chip. Throughout the years, we got games that had orchestral music, such as Sakura Taisen, Outside of orchestral music, there was the continuation of using licensed music in games. For those who love skateboarding, I think we can all agree the soundtrack for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series was damn cool. Even if you didn't like skateboarding, man, the soundtrack was just so magical. The 90s. I barely knew ye. No, really, I barely knew ye. By the way, do you know the PlayStation had a feature that allowed you to listen to your own music while playing a game? I honestly don't remember ever using this feature, but apparently it's a thing. Moving to the 6th generation of consoles, we were introduced to the Dreamcast, PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. The Dreamcast unfortunately didn't get to play with the other 3 consoles, since Sega discontinued the Dreamcast on March 31st, 2001. Some even argue if Dreamcast is part of the 6th generation, but I'm not here to talk about console wars. Regardless, we still had 3 new consoles. The PS2 had a DVD drive, Nintendo's GameCube finally made the jump to optical discs, although it was a mini disc, and Xbox, well, it was basically a big-ass computer. At this point, the sound quality for music and video games is similar to what we have now. Granted, there are some enhancements with today's sound, such as Dolby Digital 5.1 surround sound. We've reached a point where sound quality sounds great to the average person. Instead, I briefly want to talk about how creative developers got with the use of music in video games. This can easily be seen in music rhythm games. Now, if you grew up in the late 2000s, then you already know what game I'm talking about. Guitar Hero. Guitar Hero was far from being the first rhythm-based music game, but Guitar Hero took pride in providing high-quality sound when playing music. Except for Guitar Hero 3's Wii version. In 2020, we have game systems that are capable of providing beautiful orchestral music with amazing surround sound. Don't get me wrong, it's far from perfect, since there can be audio issues due to compression and low bitrate, but this is usually due to the user's AV equipment. Looking into the future, hopefully we'll be seeing the release of the PS5 and the Xbox Series 1 X. Is that right? Yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing those consoles this year. According to Sony, when developing the PS5, they wanted to increase the sound fidelity. They feel like graphics have improved greatly over the years, but in terms of sound, things have been going at a snail's pace. And between the PS3 and the PS4, the sound quality hasn't changed at all. So there is something to be said about that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they bring to the table, and if it's as good as it sounds from that tech demo that we got a week ago. I am very excited. So there you have it. The evolution of video game music has a long history. Honestly, this topic is so long, I'm considering making a part 2, talking about why video game music is so underrated. I didn't really talk too much about it rather than the evolution of music in this video. So, if this video gets a lot of likes, then it'll be a good way for me to know that you guys are interested. If I get 100 likes, then yeah, I'll create a part 2. Now my question for you, my lovely audience, is what is your top 5 video game songs? And are there any topics that you want me to talk about? Now, I'm still new to making these videos, but I do want to say thank you for the people who have been watching my videos. It really makes me happy knowing that I'm able to entertain people. So once again, thank you so much for the support, and let's just keep going. Let's keep fighting. Let's get it, let's go. Fighting, yosha. Too much weird stuff. But yeah, if you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell to be notified for more of my videos. And believe me, you'll want to be subscribed, since I've got some cool projects I've been working on. As always, enjoy life, enjoy music. Peace.